There's a deceased man in my yard. I mean, he won't tell me anything. I heard.
I can't look. He's coming.
Here, gonna have a potential crime scene.
Call 911.
Okay, I'm calling.
Scott has enemies. Scott has gambling problems.
Scott Horn. As a special agent retired from the FBI, he seemed to have left crime and violence behind him. Just then, he found himself being beaten outside his own home on the chilling ground. It was a puzzling mystery, leaving police to wonder. Had someone from his past resurfaced for revenge, or was the killer much closer to home? Suspense musters in the air as this mystery tries to unfold. With a GoPro camera and his heart racing fast, a man walks in the middle of the road. But what he later finds would ignite an investigation that will eventually become one of the most horrifying cases ever. It's all connected to the drama that began earlier, where a daughter couldn't tell the whereabouts of her father. Scott Horn, a loving and caring father, wasn't the type of dad that would just disappear. However, being in the FBI for 23 years, he had programmed his life like a clock and would do the exact same thing every day. Nevertheless, Scott's daughter, Kelly, lives on her own at age 18, and despite this, she remembers clearly her dad starting his morning with the same routine, which is a phone call. But on this fateful morning, March 16, 2017, things will take a different turn. Kelly doesn't get the alarm beep on her phone to wake her up as usual. Worried, she used every medium to reach out to her dad, but to no avail. She remembers her dad's next-door neighbor and immediately reaches out to them. But none had seen Scott around, tensed. Kelly had only one option left. Officers from the Laurel Police Department meet up with Kelly at the house to do a welfare check on Scott.
His name's Scott, right?
Yeah.
Nice house.
Reaching the house, they moved from room to room, searching for Scott, but there was no one at the house, except for the dogs, which were usually outside. This immediately sent a red flag to Kelly, which no one was expecting. Tension thickens in the cloud as Kelly couldn't wrap her head around this. Nevertheless, she decides to search the basement while another officer searches the room upstairs. Still, there was no trace of Scott. Kelly, however, takes some belongings and tells the officers she is going to try and locate her father. Unfortunately, later arrived and Kelly still did not get any information about her dad. Kelly, however, had talked with her older brother Riley, who also hadn't seen their dad since the night before and was worried as well. Later that night, Riley decides to head over to the house with a friend. Using a GoPro camera, he starts a record in the quest of finding his father. As they walked, his friend heard an unpleasant sound at the left side of the house, and when they followed the area where the sounds had come from, what they found was something so chilling and horrific you would never guess what it was. What they saw sent Riley running over to the neighbor's house, where his sister Kelly was waiting for him. And what she was about to see would destroy her. On getting there, she falls to her knees and weeps bitterly. But what did they find out? And just like the speed of light, officers were back to the house. Swinging into action, the officers start moving over the driveway as Riley shows them where he had found. Shockingly, Scott is found dead. And now, the process for a murder investigation begins as uncertainties fill the air. Investigators, however, discovered that whoever murdered Scott didn't just kill him. This was an overkill scene from a movie. Meanwhile, Scott had been shot in the neck. Although the wound disabled him, it was not fatal enough to kill him. But in a twist of events, he was brutally beaten by a wood log, of which he died shortly after. Surprisingly, police discovered there had been another person inside the house all day. It was Scott's estranged wife, Anne. As Detective Anderson begins his investigation, he thinks it will be best not to spill all the details of Scott's case, but keep some vital details to himself. Hence, as he talks to Anne, Anderson was careful.
Where is Scott at?
The last I saw Scott was early this morning.
There's a man deceased yard, okay?
There's a deceased man in my yard.
I haven't.
Anne, in any case, seems not to have any idea what Detective Anderson was talking about. But if you are wondering, just like I am, why Anne hasn't been out there searching for her husband, the answer will shock you. After 2 decades of marriage, the couple who once loved themselves were both living separate lives under the same roof, while reaching an agreement for a divorce. But that's not all.
I mean, he won't tell me anything. I hardly ever see him. He's gone most of the day, every day. I don't know what else to tell you.
Anne claims that Scott hasn't been talking to her or letting her in on anything he does, and she reveals an interesting detail that changes everything for the detectives for this case.
I know he gambles all the
Moments before Scott was murdered, he spent his last hours at the casino. However, detectives wanted to know if someone had followed him down from the casino. After their investigation, they found out that Scott was alone. But security footage from the casino shows Scott's last moments playing cards, and just after midnight, he cashed out and was heading to his car. You might be wondering if someone actually followed him out of the casino, but the CCTV footage shows him walking to his car all alone. Just a few hours before his murder, Scott Horn hits less than $100. Was he murdered because of the money he won? Officers still needed to ascertain if this was a robbery gone wrong or just a random crime. However, detectives noticed Scott's wallet and cell phone missing, so was this staged? Or was this a robbery gone wrong?
We checked into the activity on his bank cards. There were no activity. In my experience, when a robber takes property from a victim, they end up at a gas station.
And they're trying to use the cards as quickly as possible.
Yes.
Didn't happen.
No, not in this case.
As the officers went deep into Scott's credit cards, it was totally clear this wasn't a robbery gone wrong. In the meantime, they checked the crime scene again, and it speaks of a crime not being random. Detectives, nevertheless, saw that there was a lot of emotion in the way Scott was brutally beaten after being shot, which speaks more of anger. You see, as an FBI agent for 23 years, Scott has obviously come across a lot of bad boys, and probably one of them might have carried a grudge about Scott putting his hands or cuffs on them. So, investigators took this as a lead and had a deeper look at Scott's case and eventually ended up with nothing.
Been anything like that I'm going to get you or curse you.
And even though that does happen,
It does.
but that didn't seem to apply with him.
That is correct. It did not apply with him.
Meanwhile, Scott's other career comes to mind at this time of the investigation. In retirement, just after fixing up his own house, Scott found a new career as a landlord with more than a dozen tenants after buying several properties in the neighborhood. However, officers learned that Scott had recently evicted some people from one of his properties.
And he's got a lot of people that are angry with him right now.
Scott has enemies. Scott has gambling problems.
Apparently, it could be that some of these people want him dead. Meanwhile, as officers delved deeper into this, with the mindset that they had gotten another lead, it turned out that the possible lead led to a dead end. As they searched for a possible way to unravel this mystery, their mind flashed back to the house, and they thought, what if this mystery was closer to home? Now, officers must delve deeper into Scott's volatile home life, and the person who discovered the body, Scott's son, Riley, wasn't left out.
Brought Riley back to the station. He voluntarily came, and he also voluntarily gave us a detailed description of what he found and how he found it and where he'd been.
But could he have wanted his father dead? Nevertheless, officers didn't think so after discovering how much Riley had loved his father, and Scott, in any case, had been of great importance in his son's life. So officers soon ruled Riley out of their list, but was this a good assumption?
A detailed description of what he found and how he found it.
Also, the detective immediately found out that Riley had been at work all day. So then, who were Scott Horn's enemies? Detectives delve deep beyond the beautiful house of Scott Horn to see if they can unravel the mystery set before them. Meanwhile, when detectives take a closer look on the inside, they will find a dark and hidden secret that is entirely shocking. Scott Horn's life, however, was celebrated by a lot of people. There were jokes. Tears and eerie awkwardness are also present, as Scott's estranged wife sits in the front row. However, those who had been close to Scott knew he had a troubled marriage, and this could have been the clue detectives were looking for. Meanwhile, Scott's best friend, who knew Scott and Ann a lot more, says Scott's clashes with Ann started years earlier, mostly over the kids. But little did Scott's friends realize they only had a glimpse of what goes on inside of Scott's marriage. However, life beyond closed doors was a different story. Nevertheless, Kelly described her mother as erratic and sometimes violent, and that growing up was one of the toughest times of her life. However, on one occasion, after borrowing her mother's heels and keeping a secret Facebook account, Kelly claimed her mom made her sleep in the hallway for months. Unfortunately, as Scott talks to Ann about the punishment measure given to Kelly and tries to object, Kelly alleges her mom pulled out a handgun.
Like his whole demeanor changed. It was more like, okay, we're just going to take a step back.
And you leave the house with him.
Mm-hmm.
What'd he say?
He just said, if you ever see her gun again, call 911.
You never saw that gun again?
No.
At that moment, Scott's whole demeanor changed, and he told Ann they were going to just take a step back. But when Scott got his daughter, Kelly, out of the house, he told her if she ever saw the gun again to call 911.
What'd he say?
He just said, if if you ever see her gun again, call 911.
You never saw that gun again?
No.
Nevertheless, that was the last time Kelly ever saw the weapon. But surprisingly, police were called to the home at least 15 times between 2012 and 2017 for disputes among the family members. However, detectives were stunned with what they were about to hear.
How many times police come to that house?
They knew us regularly. They were there a lot.
You lost count.
Yeah.
Between 2012 and the start of 2017, Laurel police responded to that home at least 15 times. We found 30 cases ranging from domestic violence to second-degree assault to numerous protective orders.
At age 18, Anne asked her teenage daughter Kelly to move out of the house, but Scott remained in the house. At least beyond everything, it was his house. But what Scott did not know was that he underestimated his wife's self-restraint. When the marriage finally fell apart, neighbors claimed Anne and Scott had been in a bitter fight over the house he loved so much at the time of his death. Detective Anderson heard about all of these. His mind flashed back to the first time he interrogated Anne, and now he thinks she has been too calm for someone who had just lost her husband, and she was all too quick and eager to give out information. Was she the one they have been looking for?
He gambles all the time, and he's got a lot of people that are angry with him right now.
Scott has enemies. Scott has gambling problems.
When detectives took a closer look at Scott's file, they found no other enemy other than Anne, his estranged wife. Also, they found evidence that Anne had been likely home all day. This means she was home that afternoon. Kelly and police officers went to carry out the welfare check on Scott. So how could she not hear them? Officers now believe that Scott was already dead when they came for the welfare check. The sounds Riley and his friend had heard on the night he discovered his father's body.
Right here. I can't look. He's got right.
He told investigators that it was more than that.
Did you actually see who it was, or?
I did not. It was just all shadow.
Okay, you saw figures.
Yes.
Nevertheless, Riley believed that that shadow was no other person than his mom. Meanwhile, when the police asked Anne if she had been outside that night of the interrogation, she said,
Have you been outside?
I was outside to put wood on the fire, but that was it.
And you didn't see Scott out there?
No.
Police thought Anne was hiding something, or maybe they were wrong. As they look within to get some information about Anne, she quickly emerges as a prime suspect in the murder of Scott. Even next-door neighbors think it was Anne from the get-go.
And I said, Scott, you should leave the house.
They said Anne didn't miss a chance to spread false information about Scott. Nevertheless, this was a voicemail Anne left them months ago before Scott was murdered.
He's brutal. And because he ran the streets, until I married him at age 37, he was nothing but a man whore.
Another neighbor also shared their shocking side of the story, where she videoed the interaction she had with Anne on the street.
I left because I was not going to be beaten up by Anne.
At that moment, Anne claims her family was abusive to her.
You know, I have a really hard time believing that happened.
I know, because you're stupid. You don't know how deceptive an FBI agent can be.
But do you think it was Anne? Who else could have murdered Scott Horn? As these stories kept coming from neighbors, they all had one name in their lips, and that was Jason Allen Bird. Who exactly was Jason?
Jason Bird is a person who was previously employed by Scott Horn.
Interestingly, being one of Scott's contractors, investigators felt Jason Bird should be interrogated. Thankfully, another lead just appeared right in front of the detectives, which was about to change everything. Neighbors, however, speculated that Anne was out to get Scott.
Anne was out to get Scott, that they had a very contentious divorce, that she was having an affair with Jason, and wanted to, ride into the sunset with Jason.
But Anne obviously denies these allegations, and that Jason was nothing more than a friend to her. Investigators believed Jason may have helped with the disposal of Scott's cell phone, wallet, and the gun used to shoot him. It turns out that Jason's truck was seen at the house, and one of the neighbors helped with a picture that was taken that afternoon, which police believed to be Jason. This led to the theory that Jason might have helped discard Scott's belongings. Days turned to weeks, and still no arrest was made. Kelly, on the other hand, only felt it was a matter of time because she had no doubt her mom had murdered her dad. Could she be right, or was she only angry at her mom for treating her badly? In any case, Anne's friend with whom they went to school together thinks it is impossible for Anne to have murdered Scott.
She would tell me how sometimes she would actually hum or softly sing to her patients, whether they were soldiers or infants.
She, however, believes Anne used her kind heart as a nurse over the 30 years of her career. And now, detectives have seen that Anne's background is not one that can be typically associated with a murderer, and they are shocked to hear a whole new different side of Anne, which could have saved her from rotting in a prison cell. So, what went wrong? Anne's attorney thought.
Of the issues that developed between Anne and Scott actually arose from their daughter Kelly. And Anne had a difference of opinion from Scott as to how to deal with Kelly.
Probably because of Anne's strict background, she had her own ideas on how to deal with Kelly, who was, however, an overbearing teenage girl. Scott, on the other hand, was an over-permissive parent, and that made him turn the kids against their mom. But however, Anne's attorney also hoped that the police would take their eyes off Anne as a prime suspect. That never happened, as she was the only prime suspect in Scott's murder. And on June 30th, 2017, at a hotel that was 2.5 miles from her former home, police arrested Anne Allen for the murder of Scott Horn.
Please open the door. Hi, you can't find you back there in the rest of the work.
And Jason Bird was arrested as well. After the arrest, everything was about to change. The crime scene gave police a whole new clue. They found wood chips in the washing machine in the house with Scott's DNA on them, suggesting someone may have tried to clean up. And this linked Anne again to the crime. Now, even with this new evidence, prosecutors were troubled. They were threatened by the case having to fall off before it had even begun. Do you think detectives were too quick to conclude Anne was their suspect? Or did the jury gather enough information to make a judgment? Charged with the murder of her husband, Anne Allen pleaded not guilty and waited in jail for her trial to begin. But Anne's friend was dumbfounded about this.
There's no way that Anne would do something so heinous. There is no way.
At the trial, prosecutors alleged Anne, who continued to maintain her innocence, had waited for Scott to come home and then killed him when he went to put another log on the stove, putting a final end to their contentious divorce battle. On the other hand, Anne's defense attorneys highlighted the lack of physical evidence to place her at the murder scene. While Scott's DNA was found on the wood chips in the washing machine, Anne's DNA was not found. It also wasn't found anywhere on the body. They also argued that Anne, who walked with a cane, was not physically capable of the brutal beating. Anne, they said, also had no financial motive to want her husband dead, as she had already been taken off his life insurance policy and would be responsible for his $220,000 in debt since the couple had still been married.
Scott had $220,000 plus in credit card debt spread amongst 21 different credit cards.
And she's on the hook for that.
Absolutely.
After 2 days of jury deliberations, there was a verdict. Unbelievably, Anne was found not guilty and was set free. However, Scott's friends in the FBI were dazed at the verdict. Anna later moved out of the state to live her life away from public scrutiny. But, nevertheless, the Laurel police closed Scott's murder case unless other evidence was discovered. Under the double jeopardy rules, Anne can never be tried for the murder again. As for Scott's children, they are now trying to move on with their lives, but they still honor the legacy of their father. Sadly, Scott Horn's case will remain unsolved.